What's going on, everybody? Welcome to, it says the 32nd episode. I think it's the 33rd episode. I cannot count. We're figuring that out. Stay tuned by episode 40 something, and I'll learn how to count, and I'll actually have the presuppositional video before 40, hopefully, if that's going to happen. But anyway, we're extremely excited for this episode. We have the infamous Shannon Q on to discuss, I guess, a lot of different topics. I think me and Cease had we had a lot of different routes to go on this. I know I want to talk about the soul a little bit, and I think Cease kind of leaks somewhere into that, but we also are going to go into some other topics that aren't just in regards to the soul or neuroscience or things of that matter. So Cease, how are you doing, man? And what are you expecting out of this show and in the future for Axioms before we start?
Well, I'm hanging in there. It's been a long couple of weeks, so I'm very excited to have Shannon on. I really love her content, so I'm happy that we're able to get in touch. But yeah, I'm definitely excited for the future. More conversations, more interesting debates, more probably bringing my brother on to talk about science. And yeah, I'm very glad and I'm very grateful that we got the chance to do what we're doing. I think it's been really fulfilling, and it seems like it's growing. So I think
little birdie told me that you and your brother got to well, I didn't say little birdie, I actually saw it myself, but I'll just come out and say it. You got to real fast. You got to talk to Dr. Krause the other day and ask him a question. So did your brother. Did you, real fast before we go into it, did you want to say anything about that, or just wait till we drop the clip? Or
I wanted to say thanks to those guys for having me on the show. It was a really fun time, and I feel like I probably slightly annoyed Krause with my question, because I knew that he definitely got a lot of pushback from the philosophy community for some of his comments, and I wanted to see how he replied to that.
His face lit up like when you hit the P on philosophy.
It was. I couldn't help myself. I had to go there, but hey, it was a good time, and it was in that conversation, even like after Krause left, was a good practice in epistemology, with some of the conversations that were going on with some of the other people there. So it was a great time, and I love those guys and what they're doing. So
yeah, well, we'll go ahead and introduce our guest, and we'll have that clip up. I think Justin from the EA gave us permission on that. I want to confirm that, make sure, but we should have that up there, like a 5-minute video or so, or 6, maybe somewhere up to 10 minutes, but something for you guys to look out for. We'll go ahead and introduce our guest, Shannon Q. And I hit the wrong button, so it was the longer one. But anyway, Shannon, how are you doing today? Thank you for coming on.
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited that you guys wanted to have a chat.
Yeah, I'm glad that you found a spot in the woods to
sit down with my TARDIS.
Yeah,
I love the background so much.
Yeah, it is actually a really good background.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and just pass it off to Cease and have you guys, I guess, start it out so I can stop, blubbering and being a fanboy. So Cease, if you want to go ahead and ask questions and then get me more comfortable into my questions, we can do it that way. I'll put all of it on your shoulders.
All right. You're on.
So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you was to just provide a little bit of your background, what is it you do, why it is you do it, and why you're passionate about it.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a big question. I bloviate, so I talk ad nauseum. So feel free to interrupt me at any time because I never shut up.
No, it's perfect. That's what we're here for. So it's perfect.
to listen to me like ramble on. Okay, perfect. So I'm Shannon Q. I have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q. I've been doing the YouTube channel for several years. One of the reasons that I started the channel was because I found that dialogue surrounding belief had become more combative and less cooperative. And people were more interested in kind of owning each other than they were in actually, delving into finding the truth or seeing like how we come to beliefs. So I wanted to create a channel where we elevated the discourse, which is my channel banner. One of the pillars of the channel. I have 3, which is try to be better, not the same, advocate for your own understanding, and elevate the discourse. And through my work on that channel, I've been very lucky to be able to work with some other really amazing channels. Like I now co-host the Atheist Experience at least once a month. I'm one of the standard co-hosts on the show. I've worked with Apologia. I've worked with Genetically Modified Skeptic. I've worked with Rationality Rules, Cosmic Skeptic, Holy Kool-Aid, Jimmy Snow, like the whole gamut of the kind of atheist YouTube community. And I get to talk to people like you. And I just wanted to, I guess, be an atheist advocate so that atheism can be a bit more normalized, because some people, I believe, kind of have the perception that atheists are sort of antagonistic, self-righteous jackasses, and
Sure.
not all of us are.
So you use the word advocate. I felt like that might be specifically chosen instead of maybe like activist or something like that. Why do you maybe say advocate versus activist?
Well,
Because I actually don't like the activist term myself, so that's why I think I caught on to it quick. So
interesting. Okay, yeah, it is a purposeful choice. So I'm interested in how you caught on to it, actually, because it is a purposeful choice. One of the reasons that I chose advocate is I feel as though activist is kind of front loaded with a lot of baggage. And not everything that I do is activism. I do some activism, but that's not everything that I do. But ultimately, my end goal is to be an advocate for atheists, somebody who can be a voice for atheists to help normalize atheism. I suppose you can look at that as activism, but it doesn't come with the same baggage, and I think more adequately explains what I intend to do.
Sure. Yeah. And so I don't know, for me, I remember I used the term activist for a while, and it might have been you in a same chat we were in for another YouTube channel.
Okay.
But someone had mentioned I don't use activist and I choose advocate on purpose. And I wanted to say that was you.
It sounds like something I'd say.
That seems to fit the puzzle piece. And that's what made the kind of the wheels for me, because then I thought about it and was like, it actually makes more sense. I just was using the term as kind of like a blanket statement of what I do, but not really realizing what it entails. And I thought advocate has a better, it fits that better for what I'm going with. So I think I probably stole that directly from you without even knowing it. So
good. Steal away. That's awesome.
Yeah.
If you think it's a good idea, it's not really stealing, it's adopting.
Yeah, I think the distinction is important. I do.
Good.
But yeah, sorry to cut you off on the if you want to rephrase the second part of the question to Shannon.
Yeah. So there's one sort of pattern I'm starting to recognize when I engage religious people, and it's this false equivalence between the way that we trust testimony in science with the way that religious people trust testimony in their context. I talked to someone that kept asking, well, how do we know that the scientists are really verifying their experiments? Trying to sort of equate the two as both being dependent on faith and both being types of religion.
Oh, that's a stretch.
It's ridiculous. It's just not understanding how it works. But I was wondering, I was curious to see how you would sort of respond to that type of perspective.
So let me make sure I'm understanding. Are you suggesting that religious people in dialogues lean into personal testimony as being something that's really solid evidence of something, like something that can be trusted and is like a strong type of evidence, but they wouldn't hold standard elsewhere? And you're wondering what I think about that, like from a psychological perspective?
Well, when I say something to them, like, testimony isn't reliable.
It's not.
It's not reliable. And they'll say things, well, you rely on the testimony of a scientist. How do we know?
They make that
they're,
they equate
it. I find it pretty enraging, because it's just like not understanding how science is actually done.
Right.
And it's like they go from having no critical thinking to turning into like super skeptics, where now like we can trust anything on any level.
Right.
And it just really bothers me. Right. I just wanted to see what you thought about that.
It's interesting because they're sort of making a conflation there in order to make it seem like their point is stronger because we trust science, like air quotes, trust science. That means that it's the same type of faith that we have in science as we would have in something like a personal testimony. So in order to do that, they kind of alleviate the dissonance that would be caused by them admitting to the fact that A, personal testimony is just garbage for the most part. And B, we're not just trusting science, we can actually go and verify what the scientists did themselves. We can look at their methodology in order to be able to ascertain whether or not the results that they've come to and can retest are something that's verifiable and reliable. So I can understand your frustration because and I've been exposed to it myself because there's so many instances where if you're engaging with theists, they make these sort of conflations between perspectives in order to make it seem as though there's an even keel between both perspectives. Like I'm sure you've often heard that atheism is a religion in the same, it's like the same sort of vein.
Pull you onto their level or something.
Right.
Like they acknowledge that they're in a bad spot, so let me bring you down with me, kind of a thing.
Yeah, or we're both, trusting something, or we both believe in a thing, and damned be why we believe in it, or but what
we're
methodology
not so different,
we utilize.
You and I.
Right. Right, exactly. So who cares what methodology or epistemology we use to come to the conclusions that we have? We both came to conclusions and believe those conclusions, thus are the same. So it's a similar sort of thing. But it's interesting that you mentioned the hyper skepticism on the other side of the coin, that they're saying, well, you can absolutely trust personal testimony, but also you can't really trust science because, yeah, I'd never really thought of it that way, that they're saying you can trust this, but I'm also hyper skeptical of this, even though I'm equating them as the same, and they don't see the disconnect.
And it's weird because like you have this idea of like we go with the testimony or just the claim, right? Like I could go with someone's testimony that that evolution is true and just go off that testimony, right? But that's not how it works. I don't pick up my biology book and read the book and go, oh, allele frequencies change over time in a population. Like, no, this is something we can use the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. We can literally go actually see this independent of the claim or the testimony that is being put forth. And I always try to like highlight that's the difference. Is like you stopped at testimony, like we kept going. Like you had an abductive hypothesis. That's all you can get to. We actually are doing this testability or verification or falsification part.
And the other issue they miss when they approach it this way is that we have actual results. Like when they ask how do you verify, the fact that we use technology, where do you think that comes from? It doesn't just appear from nothing. It's the result of science, moving forward. And so we have actual results, concrete results that we can point to that go alongside that shows that these things are actually being verified, and yeah. So it's one thing that definitely gets under my skin. I feel.
Do you think that they do that because they have come to that they actually realize how faulty personal testimony is?
No, I think they do it because they want. I think it's the opposite. They
think it's they think it's strengthened, like it strengthens their case to put it on a.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think they're pretending like we're being hypocritical.
Okay.
And it's because they don't understand.
It's good insight.
The actual methodology of science.
Right.
And they're misusing terms like faith. It's just an intellectually dishonest approach. And yeah, it's just terrible.
So you think they legitimately see them as similar?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of them do. And there's this false belief that unless you can ground reality in God, that everything becomes relative. Like we have no way of grounding anything. It's just
Yeah, we'd all just be eating babies and murdering each other, and nobody would care about anything. We'd stop feeling feelings and having cognitions.
Yeah,
right. And it's this false views of materialism, physicalism, where it's like, well, you can't derive meaning from the material, you can't derive morals from the material. Like it's just not understanding sort of the philosophical traditions that have discussed these things for a really long time,
Yeah.
they're not willing to put in the work, and it's just not thinking honestly about these topics.
So much of that just seems to me to be this emotional appeal to like what to consequence. Like it's the same with morality. When you start to talk about morality with them, and they're like, "Well, you don't even have a foundation, and if atheists were in charge, everything goes then because there's no foundation." Like just youth approach dilemma be damned. Also, but like whatever. And what it all boils down.
That's not the consensus position within philosophy for people that are naturalists, which it is. Moral realism is the consensus in that. So it's weird that you can't have a standard. It's like, well, no, yours is theism is the one with the problem, not atheism or not naturalism. Theism is the one that has the youth throw dilemmas or any of these types of problems that we have, problem of evil or whatever it might be.
I think it comes down to fear, though, because in their mind, at least, like, and hashtag not all theists, right? But in these instances where we're engaging people who use these arguments, what it boils down to almost always with me is like, I'm afraid that if there isn't a way that I can just concretely say this is wrong, then like I'm afraid. If it's up to us, I'm afraid. I don't like that. I like this better. Is what it seems to boil down to, without coming to the recognition. Sorry, I've had a long day, and I have multiple sclerosis, so if I'm a little stuttery, I apologize. But like, without coming
We're
to
heavy drinkers, so no worries. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, it's all fit right in. I don't have a drink. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we're just joking.
So like, without realizing that essentially what they're doing anyway is kind of the same, because if you ask them for the basis of a moral, like that they see something they see as moral, they'll be able to come up with an explanation. They'll be able to give you an explanation for why they think it is or is not moral, but they don't seem to come to the recognition that that's what we do. Like you gave a rationale for something being moral or not moral. That's what we do. That's the way that it operates. But You're saying that we don't do that, or that if it wasn't something that was prescribed to you, you wouldn't do that, when in fact you're just demonstrating that you already do.
Yeah, and they kind of put it through a funnel. Like I had a conversation a couple episodes ago with a Muslim that was saying that he takes his morality from Allah, and then I was like, well, how about this situation that's presented? He's like, well, then I would kind of go through my own discourse of, and I'm like, well, then you don't need because you just have this like safety net. Like this is what the same thing that people do with faith and evidence. They're like, well, my faith does have evidence. Well, it's like, no, you're just creating a safety net of evidence to catch you when we call you out for the fact that faith is useless. Because like if you take two positions and you say you have faith and someone goes, well, you have faith in this. It's like, okay, well, if I have faith, you're wrong, and you have faith, I'm right. Well, then whenever we distinguish which one of us is right, we're probably going to have to introduce some new thing. So why did we waste any time with the faith part? Because clearly that methodology didn't get us anywhere, but introducing this new thing does. And so it's like, that's the thing I don't understand, is that that's what science does. It's like, you could look at a conjecture or hypothesis or something like that as faith if you want. But that doesn't stop there, because a hypothesis is conjecture, right? But you go further than just that. You'd have a novel prediction. You have people that want to constantly debunk it so that they get recognition for it, right? There's all these things that make sure that the peer review process weeds out those types of biases that are inherent within being human. But just saying faith, or I have faith in something, like, you just stop at one step. At least that's how it feels to me.
Yeah, like they tacitly are kind of admitting that faith alone isn't a defensible position when you're comparing your beliefs against reality to validate whether or not they're true, but then defaulting to faith as the reason for their position, but saying that that's not it. It's all these verifiable things until you reach the end of the line, and then it's faith.
Yeah, and then you can try to define that too. And I always go into Hebrews 11:1. Like, what are you referencing? What is your like focal point of what you mean by faith? And like, well, I just mean trust.
That's right. Trust.
And I think atheists. I think I'll switch it real quick. I think atheists make this mistake. Okay. And you guys might disagree with me. I have no problem with faith meaning trust. Trust does not entail you have good evidence or reason for why you trust something. Just the fact that I trust that I have X amount of dollars in my bank account doesn't mean I have it in any way. Nor does that.
I agree.
And so like a lot of atheists, like, it doesn't mean trust. Like, no, it can mean trust, but that doesn't entail any actual epistemic justification. There's nothing that says because I trust something, I automatically have epistemic justification for it.
Yeah, it seems like ultimately that's just a semantic argument that's used as a distraction.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like if that's what you mean by it's fine, I don't care.
Right.
Doesn't
just define how you want the terms to be defined, and I'll address. Yeah. You mentioned in the beginning how you started your channel as a way to sort of put focus and value on more amicable conversation, to try to sort of build bridges as opposed to burn them.
Yeah.
And to some degree, that's what we're trying to do here as well.
Awesome.
But I find myself as I get older that it becomes harder for me to do, especially on whether it's on YouTube or especially in comment sections or like TikTok, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm becoming far more impatient and reactive to people's unearned arrogance. Like anytime I get a theist saying you believe that we came from nothing,
mm-hmm.
I just want to insult them. Like that's the instinct that comes in, because it just enrages me that you like, because I've done the work to get to, I've studied philosophy, I've studied science, I've tried to really put in the work to try to understand the way things are.
Yeah.
And they haven't. They just have something they feel is true, and then they just state it as fact without any kind of ability to support their opinions. And it's just enraging that the level of arrogance and ignorance meeting together.
They really, really think it's true. Doesn't that make a difference?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's what we're talking about.
But they extra super believe it. I mean, whenever you're challenging somebody's faith, that's going to be something that elicits an emotional response from people. That's just something that I've just come to grips with. But I completely understand. I absolutely and completely understand. I'm to the point now that like I get inundated like with death threats, like all nonstop stuff, right? Like, so I completely understand the frustration, but I consistently come back to this in my mind. I like to have my goals align with my actions and measure how I behave against what I want the outcome to be. And if what I want the outcome to be is that more people of faith or not of faith, whatever, are willing to engage with or listen to me or take what I say seriously, sometimes I have to just swallow it and move on instead of satiating my visceral impulse, which I sometimes do. Like, I'm weak. There's times that I just fuck you flies out at people. There are times that does happen. I don't always succeed, but I do my best to be measured for that reason. Like, if your ultimate goal is that you want more people to engage with you, to have fruitful conversations with you, to watch you even though they don't agree with you, consistently making them feel as though you're an adversary who doesn't respect them is not the way to make that happen. So I do my best not to do it. Now, sometimes on a case-by-case basis, somebody needs to get a backhand across, like, through my keyboard because they're being a jackass. But that doesn't mean that that's the way that I should engage, even if I am frustrated. And I feel the same way as you, because people come at me about like psychology and neuroscience stuff all the time. And I'm no genius. I'm mostly an absolute moron who just knows potentially more than the average person about this because I studied the field. So that's fine. But when people come at me with stuff that is just so patently false, with this arrogant attitude, like I'm some sort of moron, and their absolutely ridiculous trope that they're trotting out in front of me, like they just owned me, is the best thing that anybody's ever heard. And they just proved that I'm the idiot. Sometimes I get frustrated too, and I just want to be like, why are you so stupid? And why do you think you're right when you're so clearly wrong? And it's so easy to. So yeah,
I'm sure you've gotten a big gulp of that in TikTok or since you've.
TikTok's wild.
Well, when you joined,
toxic.
Well, when you joined, I saw like, oh, she's going through her For You page right now is all the religious stuff. That's cool. I was like, I was sitting there thinking, wait till it shifts. And it goes to what I've been dealing with, which is the spiritual, pseudoscientific community, chakras, all that kind of stuff. And I think I saw you posted a video or something. You were like, "Can I get back onto religious For You? Like, I'm done with this." And that's I actually wanted to kind of discuss with you in a sense is there's various ideas of the soul of what that means, the immaterial and those types of things. So I guess before I would get into that, like, how do you define the soul, or maybe better yet, how do you think what do you think is the common thread everybody's talking about when they mention something like the soul?
I think the soul
where we can find the common ground again.
I think the soul isn't a thing. So I don't think it exists at all. So I wouldn't have a viable definition of it, because I don't think there is such a thing as a viable definition of it. And you can talk to a myriad people, and each of them will have a different sort of perspective on it. Yeah. So I'm slightly hesitant to say, well, this is what people think about it, because instantaneously someone will be like, nuh-uh, this is my completely different like perspective on what a soul is. And that's part of the problem, I think, is because it's this sort of like innocuous something that is us, that exists outside of us, and then everything else, like all of the other properties, are kind of like tagged on, like on a case-by-case basis based on the individual's like theological and philosophical perspectives. So it's very much fluid. So I try to deal with the definition of the person I personally am engaging with at the time, as opposed to just assuming that this person has this perspective on the soul. But I don't think any of them are viable, because neuroscience, basically.
And it's the same thing.
I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that's that. I would agree. I don't believe the soul exists, and I think that's a very fair thing. Kind of go off the basis of the person. Sorry, Cease.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, like, it's that problem runs all through theism. Like, you're not going to get two Christians to really interpret the Bible the same way.
Get them to agree on a definition of God, even.
Right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, just real quick, post
if you're pulling up the one that I think you are, I was going to say, I wanted to pull that up too.
Okay. So, Cafe, you're welcome to come on at some point. Send us an email, and we can put that to the test. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are very knowledgeable about philosophy, and of course there are, and probably more so than me. But
I've been trying to get him on since I was a host on the Atheist Roundtable. So good luck. That's all I'm going to say. I
have been doing this.
I can't get him on the show for some reason.
Okay, well, I have been doing this a long time. So if you think you can provide something I haven't heard before, then you're very welcome to do that, and you have a platform to do it. So put it to the test.
Yeah, and I'll ask a quick thing that's from the same person. Would you say you're agnostic? I guess before I continue.
Yes, I would. I'm kind of also an atheist too, because I don't think that there's I don't even know what somebody would mean by a definition of God or by a definition of the soul. I think that they're all just these, like I said, these loosely defined sort of innocuous principles that people attribute to something that they feel as though everybody has this sort of like tacit understanding of, and that there is no solid definition. Like, for example, like if there was a viable, solid, verifiable definition, like it would be true and I would be forced to believe it. So that's the problem.
Yeah. Shout out to Tart, by the way, that's in there. Merch Shed Steve and everybody, Atheist Cats. Titan Uranus, say that carefully.
He's omnipresent.
Yeah, and Boston Mike and anyone else that I missed. But yeah, so when you go from, I guess, that aspect, like, has anyone, because my issue is going to be kind of this methodology, right? You have this idea of the soul, just like any other thing you have an idea about, it just exists in your head. For all we know, that's the only place it exists, just as some abstract kind of object that represents a brain state, right?
Yeah.
But have you been presented a methodology from somebody that can go from that to the actual, like, or is there any, not obviously you don't believe in it, but is there anything that someone's shown you that they would have a prediction or any type of thing in the realm of science, or is that just never even a consideration from your experience, or how does that fit in?
No, most arguments for the soul that I've come across, and I've been at this for a little while, tend to be more so, like, I guess they kind of fall into two camps or they overlap each other. One is just an appeal to the hard problem, right? So That's the first one, is like, there's a hard problem, therefore soul. Like, they don't see that that you can't jump from there's a hard problem directly to therefore the soul is true, but they do it anyway. And the second is this desire not to prove that the soul can exist, but to explain why things like neuroscience and philosophy can't disprove it, therefore it still could be supported. I haven't heard any good arguments like, if a soul was true. I mean, I have a postulate that, like, if to prove a soul is true, it would be very easy to observe from, well, it wouldn't be easy. It would require like a lot of like microscopic imagery on a living person, but you would be able to see sodium and potassium ions literally magic into existence on either side of the neuronal cell membrane, and ATP just come into existence without a mitochondria in order to open the channel for them to create the action potential for that neuron to fire. That would have to happen, because in order for an action potential to take place, like in a soma, like a neuronal cell body, for the like electrical impulse to be generated so that neuron can actually generate a signal and release a neurotransmitter to be received, there needs to be a specific constitution of sodium and potassium ions on either side of that cell membrane. And the mitochondria produces a chemical called ATP that opens the channel to allow them to transfer back and forth. And then that creates the action potential. And we know that generates our thoughts, our movements, our emotions. Like, we just know that this is the case. So if a soul is interfacing somehow with the brain, you would have to see that constitution on either side of the cell membrane change somehow miraculously in order for it to fire when it otherwise wouldn't, because that configuration didn't exist. Sure. So if a soul did exist, you would expect to see something like that, but you don't.
Yeah, and it seems to be like, if the person is to say, well, you wouldn't actually expect to see something in relation to that, well, then now it seems like you can use this with anything. Like my desk physical composition is only in the composition it is because of some immaterial fundamental thing that is within the physical object itself, right? Like, it seems like there's no limit at that point now when you just say, well, no, you wouldn't expect to see a result because it's the person comes back to you, it's immaterial. It's like, well, now I can just ascribe that to any physical thing I want to say it gives let's go to Plato. It gives its form, right? It gives its like, you could do this. And that's, I think, that the problem that I'd have with, like, or from my own position, is that it seems that it just opens this door where now you can really place the immaterial wherever you want without any kind of justification or any type of reason behind it at all.
You know, one problem I have with idealism is the fact that it can't actually make predictions. It only after the fact can try to create a narrative to address observations. But you know, it lacks what physicalism can do, which is actually make predictions about how these things work. I want to ask you, for the audience that might not be too familiar, could you sort of quickly define sort of the hard problem of consciousness and what your approach to that question is? Like,
oh, I love it. If you solved it, you'd get your Nobel Prize like instantly. So I obviously don't have a solution for it, and for me to.
Well, would you acknowledge that there is a hard problem?
Oh my God. Yes, of course. Okay. Why is there something that it's like to be matter in a specific configuration and not another?
So you two would be arguing against me in this case because I'm a reductive physicalist. So I would take this down to as far as I can to say that I agree that there's definitely a gap. I don't think that gap's not solvable.
Oh, I'm not saying that it's not solvable, but I'm saying that it is a problem. Right?
Okay, so, in that sense, then I guess I would concede a problem. I think a lot of people go to this like idea that we'll never be able to be able. Oh
no, I'm not there. Gap. I'm not in the we'll never be there. Like, because I think
I'm there.
You think that we could never?
We're duking it. Me and him are going to set to duke it out on the show.
Oh, this is fascinating. Let's talk about the hard problem because it is fascinating. I don't even think I clearly kind of defined what it is, but. And maybe you guys have a better definition than me, because I am not philosophically literate at all. Like, what I glean from knowing cool people is.
Yeah, I'll defer to the master's in philosophy to my
Fair
left
enough.
here. I'm like looking at Stanford Encyclopedia and self-taught computational biology major. So I have nothing with philosophy in that.
Yeah, I studied cognitive neuroscience and like perceptual cognition and communication theory. So we're all across the board.
Yeah.
But like, why is there? So there's not. We'd all agree, I think, that there's not something that it is like to be an individual like atom.
Sure.
Right. There's not like that.
Yeah, I would agree with like
unless you're like
Nagel's,
panentheist.
Well, I would agree with like Nagel's kind of what it's like to be a bat, kind of that formulation of what it would like to be. And I know Cease would do a better job of commenting on it, but the kind of what it would like to be a bat and perceive echolocation and these types of quality experiences that we don't share, right? And bridging that in actual facts and reality and how we even would describe those in physical ways. But Cease, I'm sure, can.
See, even that doesn't answer why, like, if it's not, there's nothing that it's like to be one atom. So like if I take one atom out of my cerebrum and this atom is no longer part of my cerebrum, there's nothing that it's like to be that atom. But while it was an active component of my cerebrum, there is like measurably something that it is to be like that atom when taken as an aggregate of all the atoms that are part of my cerebrum. So why is it that when it's a whole, there is something that it is like to be this configuration, but if I took out any individual component, there's no longer something that it is like to be that thing, even though it was a part of the whole. Like that is fascinating to me. Like there's something about that that's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. My thing on that is like, though, it's like, to take away, wouldn't that like, or if there was some emergent property or something, right? Like,
which is what I think.
To take away a brick from a wall or however maybe something of that nature, you're going to have this emergence of whatever new property is going to be the case because of that physical arrangement of things. So when you say what it's like to be that atom, you mean just in relation to like its initial formation to now it losing that one separately? I'm trying to gather where or at least where that bridge would be solvable, or why it's not the case, I guess, at the moment.
Right. I guess to me, it's just like, why is there this specific configuration that is a brain, that there is something that it is like to be this collection of material? But in any other configuration, for the most part, like outside of other brains and other living things, and I guess potentially, arguably, people could extend it to plants. Like, I don't know how you would, but people could. But like, if I look at any other collection of material as an aggregate, no one would argue that there's something that it is like to be a rock. So there's something about the properties of the material in our brain, or how it interacts with whatever, I don't know, like, or electrical impulse being something that's introduced, something about it creates consciousness. Sorry, I'm interested to hear what you have to say, because you're probably smarter than me about this.
No, so I used to think that we could talk about consciousness as purely brain states, and I do still think that consciousness is a physical thing. Like, I don't think it's immaterial. The problem that I've come to recognize is that we're operating through consciousness, as a matter of principle. So to make an object of consciousness, like, it's not like we see the brain and we see consciousness. Like it's like saying that we're driving a car and we can simultaneously be within the car and outside the car to look at the car. Like, you can't do both at the same time. There's something that. And also in terms of linguistics, the mechanistic description is always gonna fail to capture the full phenomena, because phenomena is primary and language is secondary. So I can know, I don't know if you've read What's Like to Be a Bat that Mike mentioned.
Ages ago, like a very long time ago, but yes.
So in that paper, what's being pointed out is that I can know the mechanics of a bat. I can know the mechanics of echolocation. I can know all these things, but I'm never going to know what it's like to be that thing, because there is, in principle, a subjective limitation that doesn't allow me to be that thing.
Right.
Now, a lot of people take that as a defeater for physicalism. I don't. I don't think it's a problem in the way people think it's a problem. Because the problem of language and the gap between the description and the thing itself is present regardless of whether you're talking about consciousness or anything else or any kind of phenomenon. So to me, it doesn't suggest that consciousness is non-physical. It just suggests that we're limited in the way that we can talk about it. We have no reason to think that it's not a product of brains, because we see that when the brain is damaged, something about what we think of conscious experience is lost, right?
Or augmented, certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
What experience do we have of the immaterial? These are just, I think, assumptions that ultimately are not well supported, and I think are linguistic errors. And so I'm not saying that ontologically I don't believe consciousness is physical. I think everything is physical. I just think that I think the hard problem is a problem of epistemology, which is we just lack the tools to fully connect sort of our subjective experience to sort of the collective. Like, we can't step outside of ourselves and fully grasp what it's like, even forget across species, but I can never know what it's like to be you, even though we're very similar in, brains are not that different, right? Like, our experiences are not going to be that different from each other, but I'm still ultimately not going to know what it's like to be you as you. And that's just a reality in principle. And so once we acknowledge that, it's like, okay, well, then let's figure out other things about consciousness that are interesting, and inform truths about phenomenology. Like, there is a philosopher named Merleau-Ponty who, in trying to figure out sort of how to talk about a shared experience of the world, he studied people with brain damage and looked at how their motor skills were affected, to where they couldn't engage with the world the way that the rest of us can, and how did that impact their their sense of existentialism, like their sense of purpose in the world, or sense of engagement with the world. And I think those questions are actually more interesting to me, because like I said, I don't think that the hard problem can be bridged, because it's a linguistic problem that I think can't be bridged in principle.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting to me. So what do you think about discussions about consciousness and what consciousness is? Like, if you could ignore the hard problem, because I think that there's so much value in trying to connect states of consciousness to neurological or neurochemical or neuroanatomical states and see how those interactions operate. That's one of my favorite things to study. Yeah. Like, if I wasn't constantly being pulled into having to that people undermine neuroscience in order to hold their positions on the soul, which is one of the reasons I talk about it so much. I had never intended to talk about neuroscience on my channel, but my God, people do love to misrepresent it or like diminish it in order to like hold their positions. But I think that that's something that's super valuable, is looking at conscious states and how they can be augmented based on like all of the things that I just mentioned going on, neuroanatomically, especially neurochemically.
Right. No, I think all those questions are really interesting, and yeah. Just because I think there are certain aspects of the problem that can't be solved doesn't mean that the questions aren't worthwhile, and it doesn't mean that sort of trying to bridge as much as we can and find out, it's not causation, at least correlation, right, between certain things, I think is incredibly valuable. I think I'm especially interested in just pure phenomenology, like what, is there a way to talk about subjective experience in objective terms, to where we can come to at least a spectrum of understanding that sort of bring us closer together as far as understanding what we are in the world. I just want to post a comment real quick.
Okay.
This is the type of comment that
Antangelo. God, Antangelo.
He's my friend. Leave him alone. He's my friend.
this is the type of comment I was referring to earlier. It's
The brain
how
can
would I
be
say
cut
this?
in. Oh no. The brain cannot be cut in half. The brain.
Oh, are we going down this route again? Shannon, I saw you just got done doing this with somebody on
The
TikTok.
brain cannot be cut in half.
But it's also not true that the intellect and the will are metaphysically simple, or that what we observe, and which idealists have to find a way to answer, is that anytime the brain is damaged, what we think of conscious experience, something about that is lost. If the two were independent, if there was some deeper thing that the soul was, then why would it be the case that affecting the physical configuration should affect the immaterial? Like, they have to answer the mind-body problem. Like, how can two things of two different substances interact and affect each other?
Right.
And yeah, I think there's a lot of assumptions there, and things stated as fact that are not remotely facts.
I'm finding it hard to focus because that was so.
Yeah,
wrong.
well, I want to see your
Really
response
sorry.
to that. I would love to actually, if you have anything else to
I'm so
mention.
sorry. That was just so wrong that it's so difficult to focus. He's talking about commissure severing, something like a corpus callosum being severed is what he's talking about. You can't literally split a brain in half. You can't.
And then he follows up with this. Like, I dropped already what I had to say. Atheists have to stick to nonsense to back up their views without God by all. Like,
Angelo, that was nonsense though, because if you're saying that the will remains, you actually have to admit that in split brain cases, you can demonstratively have two different perceptions regarding will. Like there's instances. I could talk about split brains all day, but like that is just not true. You can't split a brain in half. You cannot split a brain in half. All you can do is sever the commissures that connect the left and right hemispheres of the cortical areas of your brain, like the gyri-filled stuff that people think of as a brain. That's not even the most interesting part of the brain. I love studying midbrain structures, and the midbrain structures in the cerebellum are still very, very much present and aren't split in half. I promise you, if you split your thalamus in half, you will fucking die on Tangelo. It's not, you can't do that.
So empirically, that's the case, because we have a question that is, any evidence beyond a priori declarations that intellect remains? No, it's purely a priori. I think from anyone to make the argument, I think that's the only way they can make it. I mean, how are they going to provide any a posteriori evidence for what they're claiming about that? But
well, in split brain cases, you'd still have intellect. The issue is that there's only one side of your brain that's capable of verbal and linguistic communication, because the Broca's and Wernicke's area are usually on your contralateral dominant side. So if your right hand, oh, hi, Matt. I followed a tweet. Bless your heart.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I don't know, Matt, but I'm so glad Dr. Josh showed Matt my my TikTok video about does the Bible and Old Testament endorse slavery, and I just flipped it to a page that said yes. I saw him on the line. He said it was funny, and I was just like, I called my mom. I was like, I'm going places in life. You don't understand. You think I'm at my house doing this stuff like for nothing, but I'm going places in life. So first Truth Wanted, Talk Heathen, now Matt Dillahunty, Shannon Q. Man, I'm set.
Matt, I just want to say real quick, your destruction of Jay Dyer was wonderful to watch. I enjoyed that deeply.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sure his response was Jay did it all himself. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, to answer that question, it seems to be really only a priori that you could come to that. At least from my perspective, it's just the same kind of a priori assertions of the soul in the first place, right? Or where you could say that the immaterial is part of anything physical. I don't think when you allow that type of when you allow yourself to kind of remove those boundaries, then you could just justify anything at that point, I feel like. But
yeah, for sure.
But
I just really need Tangelo to know he's wrong.
He'll never accept it.
Really important to me that you know you're wrong. Anyway, go ahead. You may continue.
The other question that I want to ask you is another thing that I hear from theists a lot is this idea of the replication crisis in science.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to see what your perspective was on that. I asked, right. So the replication crisis is an ongoing methodological crisis in which it has been found that many scientific studies are difficult or impossible to replicate or reproduce.
I think that the replicate, like I'm going to go out on a limb here and say something that not a lot of people might say. Well, a lot of people in the fields would say it, but I think that especially in psychology in 2015, when they did, I can't remember how many studies they redid, but it numbered close to the hundreds, I think, if not over. And only 46% of them, I'm fairly certain on that number, they were able to reproduce. And you might think, oh, 46%, maybe it was even 36. But anyway, you may think like, oh, that's great. That's decent. No, it's not. It's not decent. But what it does indicate to us is that there's some methodological problems that need to be worked upon. What people do and what frustrates me is they see the replication crisis and they don't look at it as like something that can be methodologically shored up or something that has to do with, how we fund research as well, because most people are looking for a new discovery instead of spending the time really re-verifying previous studies and going over the methodology, instead of looking at it as, okay, well, this is great exposure for the fact that we need to have improvements in the fields because science is ongoing learning. That's what it is. People look at it and say, okay, well, everything that we have come across now, we can't trust it anymore. Or whole entire fields just can't have like solid evidence for them. And I hear this mostly attributed to things like psychology and a lot of the biological sciences. And it gets me really, really frustrated because there are so many really fantastic strides being taken. So for instance, like in the fields of psychology and some of the other social sciences, they're doing something that I think is like a mark of real true preventative measure and an understanding of how methodology operates and the human condition. And what they're doing is, instead of having the peer review process solely take place after the study has been conducted, you submit your study proposal to peer review, and then you are stuck with, after you go through like the back and forth of the peer review process for like at the beginning of doing your research, you're stuck with both your hypothesis, which prevents you from doing reverse engineering after the fact, because there are people who do studies and get data that doesn't support their initial hypothesis and reverse engineer a hypothesis to support a data. That can happen and does happen sometimes, and then submit it to peer review. So it prevents that as being a possibility, which is acknowledging human nature as a thing that exists.
Right.
And it also means that whatever your hypothesis is after it, and they will approve it for publication at that point, whether it be positive or negative results, they are going to get published to add to the aggregate of the body of work, because negative results are actually just as important as positive results, but quite often don't get published or looked at. So what it's teaching us is that we need to look at how we're conducting and funding science better, shore up methodologies, and do some prevention in order to prevent human nature from taking hold, and incentivize people differently, because it is humans that are conducting the science. So I understand that it is something that does exist, but to say that whole entire fields just are worthless as a result of it, which is an argument that I've seen people make relatively consistently, and it's infuriating to me, because to say the entire field of psychology or sociology or other social sciences or any sort of like life sciences are just something that is now not worth studying because we've uncovered that we could do them better is absolutely and abjectly ignorant and ridiculous. And every time I hear it, I want to throw something against a wall.
Yeah, I think the problem is way over, it's overestimated. Like there is a problem and it is an issue,
sure,
but it's not to the degree that they're claiming it is.
God, no. So that's my TED talk about why when people say, well, the social sciences are garbage anyway, they have a replication crisis. Like, do you know anything about the methodologies that go in? Do you know which studies are being held? Do you know that a lot of the social sciences, for example, they're not solidly entrenched sciences that have been around for 1,000 years? Most of the social sciences, specifically psychology, has only been around and really figuring out methodological practices that they're still shoring up for the past 100 to 150 years.
Right.
And they had a massive amount of, they had even worse problems back in the 50s, but there are some results that we can look at from that have been repeatable.
The fact it's a young science doesn't make it worthless. It just means we have to give it time to build.
Exactly.
I think the really big important part here is to say that there's not going to be like it's not going to add any credit to the other person, whatever case that they're trying to make when they point
Mhm.
out, say that there's a replication crisis or whatever it might be. That adds no validity to what typically it's brought up to. Like that
Right.
lends no credit to your argument. You still have all of your work ahead of you. You still have all the independent justification that you need to
Yeah, because
and then from there I could just cite you have a replication issue for whatever
right.
you know. So
Right.
it just seems to be just kind of this weird game of like, you're wrong because I want you to be wrong, as opposed to intellectually wanting to go through the discourse and seeing why it is the case that why we chose a certain method, how that method's worked, how we've repeated it, what the controls even were that we've repeated, and those types of things. It seems to just be, I read this, and so therefore it goes to my position, now validating whatever I have, whether it be a soul, immaterial, idealism, dualism, whatever it might be.
And a lot of people do it out of one side of their mouth. They're like, well, you can't really take the social sciences seriously because of the replication problem. And then out of the other side of their mouth, they're like, well, psychologically, if you look at this is why this is happening. It's like, excuse me, bitch, didn't you just say that you can't even trust that whole ass field?
Right.
And now you're saying I'm supporting my argument on the back of that field? Sit down.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because, at best, all they're doing, like, when they try to attack science in this hyper skeptical, like pretty unrealistic way, they don't realize that even if they were right, like Mike was just saying, all you've done is show that we don't know anything. Then, like, it's not like now your beliefs are better off because our perspective is wrong. Then in that case, we're both wrong. You still have all your work ahead of you. I want to post another comment real quick.
Sure.
Otangelo came back.
Are you trying to torture Shannon?
No. I know. I just want to say, Alejandro, I don't know if you're still there, but feel free to email us. We have a recurring guest on the show who's a quantum physicist. He's a black hole cosmologist, but he teaches quantum physics. I mean, I'd be happy to host a conversation between the two of you and see exactly where these contradictions are, because I don't think things are quite as what you're claiming they are. So let us know.
Oh, Antangelo. Oh, you send me dissertations on my Facebook page.
Yeah, he's. I'll put it this way. I'd love to have him on. I don't want to, mention anything that he wouldn't be able to come in here and defend himself. But the opportunity for anybody is to come on here. We do debates. We talk with, experts, people that aren't experts. We talk to anybody and everybody. We put ourselves out there. So anybody email us, and we'd love to have a conversation. If you go back and look through the catalog, all of our conversations have been a very good discourse.
I love that about you guys.
I appreciate that, because that's the one thing I really don't like about the atheist community is or not the atheist community, but some of the people in the atheist community, is that they're not really, they want to kind of say you're stupid or something. And I think it's just such a horrible approach to just go, you're dumb or you're stupid. It's like, you clearly don't have the ammo to back up the argument if that's what you have to rely on. Because I know when I get into these discourses, like, I want to actually get into specific things that I spend time on, right? And not just go, well, you're a big stupid head. Because then I just undermined all the work and wanting to find truth in that way. It seems that the person hasn't really tried to have their own epistemology kind of sound in that way, where they can show someone, hey, well, maybe we can just kind of compare how we ground our epistemologies and see where we agree and where we don't. And then maybe from there, we can find the errors, or you can find the error in mine. That seems like, to me, so much better of a way to go about it. But some of the people that come on, they just want to say their duty and then get off and never actually take the offer to have the conversation. But it's up there for anybody.
I think, sometimes there is a place for a certain kind of response, but I agree with both of you that usually it's better to try to keep them amicable. We had some conversations with a particular Muslim on the show that towards the end I was starting to kind of lose my patience. But even then, we managed to keep it fairly amicable, and he even talked about potentially coming back. So we'll see. But I don't know. That sometimes there's a line that becomes crossed for me, where it's like, I'm not okay with pretending like we're buddies. Like, I'm not saying that that's what you're arguing for, but like I can't. There's a certain point where I can't engage on the level anymore.
Yeah.
If someone's making excuses for slavery and pedophilia and genocide. Like at that point, it's like,
Yeah.
I find your ideology so repulsive that I can't pretend otherwise.
Those
Yeah.
are usually my lines. Like as soon as somebody becomes like manipulative or abusive, that'll flip my bitch switch right quick. Like I'm just like, okay, well, you're not actually interested in the same type of dialogue. Like you're taking advantage of my good nature at this point. So you're not attempting to be
Right.
an honest interlocutor with me. So the rules are probably slightly going to change as a result of
Right.
that. And also people who advocate for harm or abuse or bigotry, I don't get bandwidth in my space.
Right.
I'm done. But if somebody's interested in having an honest conversation, I really feel like you should always do your best if you can.
Sure.
Because like Mike said, so many people are looking for that sound bite of them owning someone so that they can go high five. Did you see how smart I looked? Guys, like, did you see that? Did you see how I owned that? And that's, like, what does that gain other than you temporary accolades and a dopamine hit? Like, what are you contributing to, like, society as a result of you feeling incredibly smart by making somebody else look stupid for a moment in time so that you could get attention as a result?
I was surprised at how patient you were when you talked to Darth.
Oh, God.
The guy's a special kind of moron.
Well, I needed to be patient with Darth, actually. Once I realized what his tactics were, I realized that being anything but patient with him, it would be playing into what he anticipates as a verbal response set. Because he's looking for verbal response sets that are of somebody he is frustrated, because then he can look towards that frustration as evidence that his arguments are compelling and difficult to deal with and attribute the frustration to that. So I needed to be able to remain calm because his script and response set dialectic strategies have that as a built-in default, from what I could tell in real time, that as soon as you get frustrated, it's part of his like eject trigger. Like if it gets difficult for him to engage in what you're saying, he'll do something to frustrate you so that he can get you verbally frustrated, and then he can appeal to you being angry as opposed to engaging what you're actually saying. So if you take that away from him as an avenue, then he's the one who gets frustrated, and then that's just amusing.
He got frustrated with me the other night on Discord. He kicked me out and banned me because the shtick that he does is to try to get someone to say, well, if you're an agnostic atheist or you lack the belief in God, his whole thing is to say, are you referencing, do you have your intelligibility facts reference God? And you would say, well, no, I don't need to reference God. And then he's going to say, well, indirectly, you're basically saying that you're denying God. And so he's getting them to concede that you are in by proxy, you are saying that you don't have to reference facts to God. So therefore you're basically saying God doesn't exist. And I just was like, no, Darth, your God doesn't exist. Like, I'm telling you that right away. Yeah. I'm a Gnostic atheist. Your God is not real. That's the argument I'm presenting to you. And he since I wasn't going down his script of like the agnostic thing, he just got like really fed up with me. And I was like, Darth, if you want to actually defend this position, I'm somebody presenting themselves as a Gnostic atheist to you. We can go down the script. I'm doing a video on your script right now as we speak to show. I'm doing a video right now that when you answer his question, it'll branch off into I have like a little graphic thing and everything. And here's the questions he'll ask you there. And on this side, here's the questions he'll ask you. But I can't ever get him on the Gnostic side because he kicks me out every time. And I think he's figured out who I am. I think he's figured out who I am because we've talked a lot. And there's a lot of clips on like Tom Rabbit and things like that of our conversations. So it's like, I think he's figured out who I am. I don't know if he's scared, but I'm taking it as a win. So, but I'd love to have an actual conversation with him because I had one with him. And it was
I did it by accident, and I don't ever want to do it again.
Yeah, I was in a good mood one day, and it was it wasn't a good conversation, but I actually could go down the line of thought without him cutting me off every second and me explaining to him like, no, you don't understand the laws of logic. Like there's plenty of people think you have to presuppose this. I don't. I'm telling you that I'm taking a different.
No, why anybody would do that? Do you know that I wasn't even supposed to be there that day? Somebody quit.
Yeah.
Somebody dropped out.
Yeah.
And James messaged me and was like, please, can you come on? And I was like, well, sure, I guess. Like if he's free at this time, fine. But I don't want to debate. I'll have a conversation.
Sure.
And after doing that, I was like, I don't know why anybody pursues a conversation with this dude on purpose.
I have no interest in talking to him because I don't find him one to discuss in good faith, and also he's so ignorant of these topics, like so severely, embarrassingly ignorant,
And
it's
people
like,
pursuing a conversation with him, I think, makes him feel as though he is some sort of like intellectual challenge.
right, which is why would I feed that ridiculous ego?
That's the way I feel.
You know,
But I guess
so like,
it's
He's
a fun
he's
game.
a
I
Bonson.
guess.
He just rips off
So-
Bonson is all he
so,
does. And,
you know,
to people that don't understand his shtick, like it's intimidating to them. But if you have any understanding at all of just like rudimentary philosophy, it's really easy.
I mean,
to go.
any,
The whole
any
argument's
bachelor
taking the
degree,
question once you get to the root. The rest of it's just a song and dance.
any bachelor degree, like, first year college student, like, see right through the bullshit. So, but anyway, I wanted to ask you something a little bit unrelated, because you mentioned you wanted to talk about feminism, and I'm curious because my perspective with most, maybe not most, but a lot of movements is that there's a lot of value and importance to them, but I'm always uncomfortable when it comes to any kind of group ideology, because I feel like eventually it becomes caricature of itself or what it was meant to be.
Okay.
And I was wondering sort of what you think. Do you see, what are the positives and the negatives that you see in both the feminist movement and the trans movement and all these things? I mean, I fully support the LGBTQ plus community. I'm for equal rights for everybody, obviously. There are just aspects of any kind of group thinking that makes me uncomfortable.
Why do you? Okay, this is interesting to me. So when you say group thinking, and you referenced a couple of different things there. So you started with feminism and then went to LGBTQIA+. So when you say group thinking, I suppose in order to address it, I would need an example of what you think and where you see them overlapping.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to refer to is sort of the quickness, and I understand it to a degree because of how marginalized these groups are, but it's the quickness with which difference of opinion or even asking questions, like not just accepting the mainstream narrative,
right,
is immediately met with, oh, therefore you're a bigot, you're sexist, you hate us, you're like, it's this immediate sort of shutting down the conversation, where because you didn't just immediately say I agree with everything you said or you believe, now I'm a bigot and a piece of shit, essentially. It's that kind of, that to me is a type of dogmatism,
right?
And there's not a whole lot that I find myself really disagreeing with any of those movements. It's more, I think, the way in which dialogue is held sometimes, that I find.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. There's a lot.
No, go ahead.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you see individuals who subscribe to or profess to being advocates for or activists within this community engaging in behaviors that you view as dogmatic.
Yeah.
Though you would agree with the principles of the movements themselves in general.
Yeah, for example, so I think a clear example is the way which the political left deals with Islam. Where I think that, now
we're on to another group as well. So it seems to me that you're talking about a group of people who engage in a specific type of behavior, because
that's
you've covered
across
the gamut.
board.
So you're talking about people who have extremist tendencies, but have extremist tendencies, but are waving the flags of the movements that you otherwise would agree with, the movements themselves.
Yeah, and so I mention all these because I find I see this sort of pattern across the board, and so.
Do you think that those patterns are exclusive to the movements that you mentioned, or do you think that there's people who have extremist behaviors within any group? And
I think it's just a fact about psychology, where I think with any movement, eventually it becomes aspect of people within that movement become extreme versions of what it was originally meant to be.
Right.
And I wonder if there are ways to sort of counter that spiral into extremism, because I think it can be very counterproductive for goals that all of us may share. And again, I'll talk about the Islam one in particular because I think it's what I have the most experience with.
Okay.
There are Muslims in the Middle East that are suffering because of certain interpretations of the religion. And they'll be the first ones to say that in private. They can't say it in public because their lives will be in danger.
Certainly, yep.
When someone like myself points that out, the go-to from both Muslims and liberals is to call me an Islamophobe.
Do you think that that's unilateral, or do you think that it has emotional impact when it happens in your, and that causes it to resonate with you and be seen as representative?
It happens a lot. It happens way more than it should. It's not like a couple of people. It's a narrative that's quite present.
So you point out issues with Islam's doctrine, and people accuse you of being Islamophobic, like on measure, quite frequently.
Oh my God, it's ridiculous. Like, and I never say things like all Muslims, but like I'm not even talking about Muslims, talking about potential interpretations of specific verses by specific people. Like I go out of my way to be very clear that I'm not in any way blanketing an entire population. I'm talking about beliefs, or in the context of gender, for example. Like the concept of gender is something that I struggle with understanding.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it is a construct.
Okay.
And even just by saying that, I've been called, bigoted against trans people. When it's like, no, I'm not denying your experience. I'm trying to understand, what it is that you mean by these things, and try to sort of get a more concrete understanding of what is meant by these terminologies. Because sometimes I find that some of the views seem almost contradictory. Like if gender is a construct, then to what degree are we kind of enabling these assumptions and roles by sort of making gender more than what perhaps it is? Or if it's something more than what I realize, then let's have that conversation, educate me, and explain to me what it is I'm missing. Because part of that may be my own limitations, because I'm highly dissociative, and so I don't ever know what people mean by what it's like to be a man or what it's like to be a woman. Like these things escape my understanding.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to be.
Oh, you froze. I was intrigued about that.
Did he freeze? Yeah, I'm having my laptop's freaking out at me again. But that's all good. I'm upgrading, so it'll be all done after this. But I don't know if Cease comes back in, we can get him on there. I
had a series of questions for him as a result.
Was there any comments that you kind of wanted to mention on that, or any kind of thing you want to say before he gets back in?
Well, there's a lot to cover there because he seems to bounce around a fair amount between different groups and how he's engaged with different groups, and he's had similar reactions from not even necessarily people within that groups, but sometimes people outside of that groups, and has felt that as potentially combative or unfair to him. So I had stuff to say about each of them individually, I think, but I don't want to talk about what I don't want to. I risk misrepresenting what he was attempting to say without him having the opportunity to clarify. So I'm hesitant to say anything about it at all because I don't want to misunderstand what he was attempting. I was going to ask him for some clarifications. So yeah,
sure, yeah, no problem. Yeah, he popped in and he popped back out again, so I'm sure he'll pop right back in. Okay. So I guess I could just lead into. Actually, I kind of wanted to say something else since we were talking about the presuppositional thing real quick. Sure. I've equated this argument to like saying that there's an equation on the board, right? If you have any presuppositional approach, and Billy presup's like, well, the answer is 12 to the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Sally Hindu's like, I got 13, and Johnny I don't know is like, or Johnny Agnostic's like, I don't know the answer. I haven't figured it out yet, right?
Yeah.
And you ask Billy Precept, and he goes, well, all those answers are impossible to the contrary because they're not 12. You didn't get the answer that I said. But if you actually had applied an evidentialist approach to solving the actual equation as opposed to this presuppositional method, well, then you might actually solve the fucking equation, and you might be able to say, by proxy, your answers are all fucking wrong because I did the answer, as opposed to retrofitting a top-down approach to why it's the case. But I just wanted to mention that since I was going back and forth with somebody in the comments, but Cease is back, so I will shut up.
Hi, Cease. You're muted still.
Sorry, guys. My internet just gave out for a minute there. I don't know why that happened. We actually lost power.
$25 a month? No, we're going to blame it on StreamYard.
No, I think it's the area I live in. It's been having some tech issues. So if it dies again, I'll sign back on from my phone or something. Just a little heads up.
It's all good. We're going to wrap it up here in a minute before my laptop dies, if that's cool. But if you guys want to finish that up, and then we'll wrap it up, if that's okay with you guys.
Oh, I don't even know. How to go
but yeah, so Shannon, I was just wondering what your response to what I was saying earlier was.
Well, you said a lot.
Yeah.
You said a lot of different things about a lot of different subjects, but what it seems to boil down to is that when you are inquisitive about something, sometimes you're met, even though your intentions are to be inquisitive and not to be bigoted, you're getting the reception that you get is that you are a bigot and not just somebody who's being inquisitive, which shuts down your desire to be inquisitive and gives you a negative reaction, either about the people within that group as a result of the feedback that you're getting, or representatives of that group. You see them as being combative or unfair to you. Is that something? Is that valid?
Yeah, and I guess what I'm wondering is what ways, how can we engage in a way where sort of extreme reactions and extremism in general can be diminished, to where more constructive conversations can take place, where I'm trying to be an ally. In some of these contexts, I'm actually a member of these communities, and yet I'm still seen as a threat because I'm asking questions.
I completely understand what you're saying. So I think it's a difficult thing to traverse. There's no real easy answer for it. And I think in each one of the interactions that you've brought up, or like each of the hypotheticals that you brought up, there could be a different underlying reason. So when it comes to addressing people like the issues with Islam, I think that there's sort of this pendulum shift that took place because there was so much racial and well, it wouldn't even be racial because Islam isn't a race, but there was so much hatred directed towards the people who ascribe to that belief for such a large period of time in such a disproportional way that people now, once they've come out of that haze, have this sort of backfire effect where now they're in this sort of protective mode where they want to prevent something like that from occurring again. So they have this hypersensitivity that sometimes can be activated when they perceive anything that may lead down that road. So I think that being sensitive to that sometimes is difficult, but understanding where it comes from is important.
Sure. Right.
When it comes to discussing issues about like LGBT and trans people, I think sometimes this is it's a kind of a separate thing. The people that sometimes people look to are public or available figures that are members of that community, and people seem to think that they are a source of education that can be leveraged. And sometimes, especially if you're consistently under attack in social media platforms for being a member of that community, being simultaneously seen as a source of education or somebody who should be, whose time is owed in order to give that education, can be mentally and emotionally exhausting. And sometimes that may elicit that type of response. But I would have to say, like, every interaction is different. And I understand that, like, as an aggregate, you may have these experiences, and I don't want to invalidate that you have these experiences, and I don't want to assume anything other than good intentions based on what you've mentioned.
Yeah.
But saying that a lot of times people ascribe whole groups of people these attributes of combativeness, or they say that because some of the people that are representing you, to my perspective, have treated me and others unfairly when we're just attempting to learn, therefore what is where I'm getting at. Like, therefore what? Like, because if your attitude is that because of the way these people behave, who have this set of beliefs, or are these types of advocates, or are these members of community, I or others may have a negative attitude towards that community as a result. To me, that's saying that you form your attitudes based on how you're treated by people, and you then create a schema about the group of people they belong to as a result of that interaction, instead of creating your schemas of groups of people based instead on your sense of equity or fairness or humanity. And if you're subscribing to one or leaning on one and not the other, I would say that that is a faulty way to perceive groups.
No, I agree with you. And just for the record, to clarify, my interaction with those individuals doesn't tell me anything about the communities themselves.
Okay.
Because I think, again,
that was my worry, that you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
because somehow.
No, because with all these ideologies, even if they may label themselves by the same term, actually internally they believe and interpret very differently all these different things. So I don't have that problem at all.
Okay.
And if it's just more of
why are people assholes? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
There's assholes everywhere.
And I would say one of the main reasons why I oppose theism.
Soul. That's why.
Souls. Our souls are assholes.
One of the main reasons why I oppose theism is the treatment of women and the LGBTQ plus community based on those ideologies.
Right.
The dehumanization of trans people, of gay people, of everyone on the spectrum, of women, is something that really repulses me to my core. And it's why people ask us, like, why do we bother if we don't believe? Why do we bother talking about these things? Well, because these ideologies have a real impact on individuals and the world that we live in, and they're trying to take the human rights away from people based on delusions. So why would I not talk about it and fight against it? It'd be great if they kept it to themselves and didn't try to change legislation, but that's not the world we live in. So
are you sensing a disparity where you feel as though, like, it's unfair because one of the reasons that you do stand up and fight against things like theology is to defend these groups of people, and then they react to you negatively sometimes, and then that seems as though almost like, hey, one of the reasons that I'm doing these things is for people like you. Right. And then that kind of gives you a sense of harm because you feel as though they don't recognize in you the fact that you are somebody who wants to be an advocate defending them.
Yeah, and it's problematic because I think ultimately it's counterproductive to the goals that we all share.
Right.
And I'm not saying that these kind of behaviors extend to most of the community. They don't. Right. But they extend enough to where
they're impactful.
It is a problem. Yeah. And that's my concern is, I think it's important. And this is one of the reasons why, I do the show, is to try to build a way to create better dialogue to where we can sort of diminish that kind of
I think one of the great ways to diminish something like that is to, instead of focusing on members of communities who you feel as though diminish the good name of those communities, to instead advocate for members of those communities. Absolutely. While not consistently referencing back to the people that you feel aren't good representation. Instead, if you find that there is good representation of members of the community, for example, start to elevate them so that that's normalized. And Absolutely. So that people have better senses of representation, because there are assholes. I am one of the gays right? So like and I'm one of the whammons. So I understand that there are sometimes people that I see ostensibly representing someone like me that I wish that they would just shut up because they're not doing what I would perceive as a good job. And but that doesn't mean that I think people like me have a problem. I think that person has a problem, and people who give them bandwidth by consistently focusing on why they are a problem, or instead of being solution oriented and just saying, okay, well, if you're somebody I can't interact with, then you're just somebody I can't interact with. I'll move on. Instead of focusing on, this has elicited this visceral emotional response from me that I don't like. So I need to instead focus on why you're like that and why other people like you are like that. And that is now my focus. Then they are doing what you're saying, which is undermining the better, broader activism. But if that's the case, then you making the conscious choice to make that your focus instead of other activists who are doing good work is essentially letting you're doing the work that you think is like, you're giving them what you would think they're eliciting from people. You're acknowledging, hey, you're eliciting bad responses. You know what's good evidence of that? I am having a bad response now. So I think it's bad because I'm having a bad response. And as a result, what happens after that is what's important.
No, I agree with everything you just said. I think that's what I was hoping you would say. I agree with completely. I think it's important to focus on the positives and the ways and the steps that are being taken forward, and where I think we see things not being done maybe the way they should be, try to approach that as amicably as possible.
Right.
And
once you hit a wall, hit the eject button.
Exactly. Right. And that's what I'm learning to do as I'm getting older. It's better to approach it that way, because ultimately it's the goals that matter, right? And we shouldn't get lost in these trivial frustrations.
Yeah, and if somebody's consistently eliciting a negative emotional response from you, and despite your best efforts to de-escalate or articulate, if they're just not able to come to where you are to understand that your intentions are good, then obviously that's not an interaction that's going to be fruitful anyway. You're just exercising in frustration at that point.
Right.
But you also have to respect that sometimes you're going to, especially with people in the LGBT community, meet a point of exhaustion where they can't explain why they exist and why it's valid anymore. Like you may just be a straw, and you just have to say, okay, you know what? Like thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
I understand. I appreciate it. Totally get it. But maybe we can interact again later.
Yeah, no, I have done that in the past, and I share that exhaustion as well in different aspects. So I completely relate and understand that perspective, and I think it's perfectly fair. And
I understand this can be emotional. Do you think I'm being fair in representing you well here? I just want to make sure of that, because I don't want to misinterpret or misunderstand you.
No. I think you pointed out, everything you're saying. I feel like I'm doing. So I'm happy that.
Okay.
That,
good.
I guess I was trying to figure out more like what your perspective was on how to approach these conversations. Right. And
some conversations can't happen. Some people are good and they're not ready.
And I had to figure that out. Yeah. And I had to figure it out. But no, I don't feel like you misrepresented me at all.
Okay, good.
I would love, if you're willing to come back at some point to talk more about these issues. And I'm fascinated by the question of gender. I think it's really interesting. I would love to talk to you about that if you're interested at some point.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure that I have the spoons left to talk about it today, but at some point in time, sure.
Yeah, we're getting ready to close up. We're seeing if there's any questions in the audience, but no, this is just for another time. If you're
I'd be happy to if I can find the time available, and you guys are wanting to have me back on. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks again.
You just hit the hour 30, so I want to be respectful to Shannon's time, of course.
Yeah.
But anyone that did just join who's like, oh man, I just missed it. The rewind button works fantastic. So you can still watch it. You just won't be with us. But technically you're not with us anyway, because we're on a delay. So So just like look at it in a very weird, reductive way like that. But yeah, no, Cease or Shannon, did you guys want to wait on questions, or how did you guys want to do it?
Your show. I'm along for the ride. Whatever you guys would like.
Well, I don't see any, so I guess we'll wrap it up. But yeah, I do appreciate. Oh, actually, no, I have one here from Autumn. Question for Shannon: favorite branch of psychology?
Cognitive. Didn't even have to think.
Yeah.
That was fast.
Cognitive, yeah. That's it. Yeah. Autumn knows that. Autumn's a developmental psychologist, so Autumn's delightful.
Yeah, Autumn's great. I'm going on her show on the 6th, I believe.
Oh, great! You are making the rounds, Mike. That's exciting.
I'm trying to do it. And he was on a show last night, I believe, right? I don't know if we plugged that. Did you end up going on or did he freeze again?
Yeah, I think so. Oh no, his head's moving.
I'm just reading.
See, actually, yeah, if you want to plug any of the shows that you were on before we get off, and then Shannon, plug your channel, and then we can wrap it on up.
Sure. I was on the Prometheus Experience last night, and that was a good conversation. And then a few days prior, I was on the EA show, and I think I'm actually going to be back on that on the 13th. And that's all so far. I'd be happy to go.
I would be like, I was on the EA show and I talked with Lawrence Krauss. You're so humble though. You're like, I was on the EA show. I would be like, I'm awesome. Everybody subscribe to J Mike right now. Like I talked to Lawrence Krauss.
Yeah, everybody subscribe to J Mike. No, it was a fun conversation. I don't know too much about Krauss. Like I know that he's a famous physicist and author, and it was interesting to see his response to what I asked him. Anytime that I can do a show with my brother along, like I love that, and so that made me happy. But yeah, it was a really fun time, and I'm excited to go back and do other shows. But really, my main focus is what we're doing here. I love this so much. So yeah.
We have a great little community with that. Like with we bounced, going to Atheist Roundtable. I helped start that with them, and everybody's like so many different things have branched off. Wes, who was like producing the EA show, was initially going to help us out. I don't know if he still might come on and help us out too with that kind of stuff. So it's cool. This whole thing's a huge family. Nobody gets bitter at anybody, and I think that's like the coolest part about it, because I've been in so many bands, and when you go to one band and you have another band, like, everybody becomes pretty pissy very quickly. I'll put it that way. But I love that there's this environment where it's like, nope, everything's all cool with everybody, regardless if you do a show here or whatnot. So I love it.
For sure. No, Shannon, as long as.
Well, sorry, Cease, go.
I was gonna say, like, as long as we're working together for the same goals and still providing content, like, I'm happy that we both get to, jump around and meet other people, and it's fun. Like, it's a good way to build community. It's really great.
Yeah. And so, Shannon, if you want to plug your channel, I'd put the description. There's a description there, and not the last video you did, but the video you did on the soul, where you broke down that video, like right at the beginning of it.
The JP Moreland one, or the other? I
think it was that one. You were drinking a coffee at the very beginning of it.
Yeah, it's probably JP Moreland.
That's what I remember. Because I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting a coffee. That's why I remembered. So that link is in there, as well as the channel. And then if you want to plug anything else, Discord, anything like that, this is your time.
I have a Discord and a Twitter and a Facebook and a TikTok now. I have a TikTok.
Yeah,
I love your TikTok.
I have a TikTok now.
We're all friends on TikTok. You should join us.
And I have a YouTube channel. It's called Shannon Q. And sometimes I host the Atheist Experience in the Line, and sometimes I go on Apologia. And I just like go on YouTube and type in Shannon Q, and a bunch of shit will show up. I'll be on those videos.
Be sure to type in Shannon Q Darth Dawkins for your first video. If this is the second video,
not the best starting point.
I think that was a great. I think, and you did. You and Jeff had your own ways of doing it in ways that I don't think anyone could replicate in a conversation like that. It was so brilliant in its own way, kind of like an atheist pastor did, and and his.
I love you as a Hindu. I love you.
Everybody, you guys are like on that level of like you have your own different interactions that are like you get put on the shelf in your own category because of how great it was. So,
oh, that's very sweet. Thank you.
It's a lot harder when you're actually the one in the conversation to acknowledge those points, but people from the outside, like it was very clear and obvious who was winning that intellectual battle. But yeah, so thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate it. We should have another episode out here. I'd say probably do another one tomorrow or coming days. I'm going to have a lot of free time after the 5th, and if we get these stimulus checks, if that happens, I've been told that that's apparently going to happen, then I'm definitely going to pay rent very early and just work on axioms. And so be on the lookout for a lot more content if that works out in the way that I hope it does. And
Shannon, thanks again so much for coming, and I hope you come back soon. This was a really enjoyable conversation.
I appreciate you guys having me. I hopefully that I didn't destroy your channel and you guys enjoy it.
No, this is an awesome episode. I love it. So I love it. I put discussion because I was like, we're going to talk about so much, so we'll just have it as a discussion, and the next time maybe we can hone it on something specific, and then go in the meat of things, so to speak.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm gonna end off. I'm gonna start ending off the show now with a clip, pretty much like every time. But I don't have a clip this time, so I'll just play one of the older ones before I start doing them again, and we'll end off on that note, so we can end off on a big smile and maybe a laugh if you find it funny. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Peace.
Hey, John, are you there?
So how you doing, Jay?
I'm doing good, sir. Yourself?
I'm doing great, man. I just wanted to just for real quick, if I could, I just wanted to say God bless to the Call to Pray Network. I really appreciate that. I think that's a real great thing you got going on. I also wanted to say God bless the church and God bless the Bible, of course. But also, most importantly, I want to say God bless our faith. And God bless the phone companies, because I wouldn't be able to have this conversation.
John?
I wouldn't be able to have the conversation with you if we don't have the phones. And God bless the sponsors for being able to let y'all do what y'all do, because y'all helping everybody out. I wanted to say, God bless God, for God, and God bless, well, chairs. If you weren't sitting on a chair, you'd have to be standing up. So I appreciate you want to say God bless chairs, because you'd have